In 2022, we really don't understand. There's been an extraordinary amount of research, an extraordinary amount of effort that's going into this and will continue to go into this, but we really don't understand. It's certainly going to be a molecular question, but the tools that we have right now, we really have a hard time predicting. Other than the TP53 mutation issue, we know that that's a very adverse prognostic sign. We know that blastoid mantle cell lymphoma has a poor outcome. And we know that if the Ki-67 is very high, that's unfavorable. But what drives those and why somebody has one of those and somebody doesn't, we really don't understand. In patients who relapse, a second opinion can really potentially change the opportunities and the approach. And I am very supportive of that. I am somewhat biased because I work at a referral institution, but there are institutional clinical trials that are ongoing. There are individuals at different sites with very extensive experience in mantle cell lymphoma who attend national and international meetings regularly, who attend meetings such as the Lymphoma Research Foundation Mantle Cell Consortium meeting, other meetings in Europe, and there's information that's coming out that just isn't otherwise out there. There are different opportunities in clinical trials through the National Clinical Trials Network, through industry trials, through investigator-initiated trials at different institutions, and these can provide some real different opportunities. And so I really encourage patients to reach out and do that. We actually had an abstract at ASCO in 2016 which pointed out that, and this was retrospective and has issued those kinds of questions, but actually pointed out that patients who went on clinical trials had an improved overall survival and an improved progression-free survival if they went on a clinical trial. Now, that was at a time period where the BTK inhibitors were coming along and some other drugs, but these things really provide some real unique opportunities. This has been a phenomenal last decade in mantle cell lymphoma. When I started training, and in my early career, we said that the median survival was 3 years in mantle cell lymphoma. I now have patients who have lived 15 years with multiple relapse and relapse after transplantation. Combination therapy is effective, so if you haven't had bendamustine rituximab and you had a regimen such as R-CHOP, response rates were overall in the 80% range in a study reported. So that's an approach. Single agents led the way. Bortezomib was the first drug FDA approved. About a third of patients responded. I then actually wrote the first lenalidomide trial for relapsed refractory aggressive lymphomas and mantle cell lymphomas, and was the first author of a paper on the topic, and thought that, boy, this was really going to make a difference. About 32% of patients responded, and that was exciting. But then along came the BTK inhibitors. Ibrutinib was the first drug with a response rate of 70% range, and that drug went on to obtain an FDA approval. The response rates were very high, but about 2/3 were partial remissions. It also had toxicities. It had bleeding toxicities and atrial fibrillation and hypertension. And we really didn't think in those terms and see those kinds of toxicities quite the same way, especially with the atrial fibrillation and the hypertension. And so new BTK inhibitors have been coming along since that time, and the next one was acalabrutinib, which had significantly less atrial fibrillation. We now have zanubrutinib and pirtobrutinib has a different binding characteristic to it, which is now in trials, and really shows how the development of a single class of drugs, how competitive it is, but also how new interventions in a similar class of drugs can improve upon toxicity questions and issues. After these drugs, venetoclax has now come along, and venetoclax is in clinical trials and has some significant activity. In 2021, the first CAR T-cell therapy was approved in mantle cell lymphoma for relapsed refractory disease. This has really opened up some doors, and the response rates are really quite intriguing. In 2021, the ZUMA-2 trial with a CAR T-cell was FDA approved in mantle cell lymphoma, which is really exciting. And there is another CAR T-cell product also out there in mantle cell lymphoma. CAR T-cell therapy is now FDA approved in mantle cell lymphoma since 2021. Brexucabtagene autoleucel was the first drug. Lysocabtagene maraleucel was the second drug. And these are going to be followed by new CAR T-cell approaches with different CAR T designs. And so this is going to probably really change the field and our approach long term. Lastly, we've known that patients can be long-term survivors after an allogeneic bone marrow transplant. The issue is the mortality rates are 25% in the first 100 days, but in those patients who do not have significant graft versus host disease and survive the first 100 days, there's a very significant long-term survival rate. We incorporate this much less in 2022, but it is still a therapeutic intervention. So patients, it's imperative that they be followed and not lost to follow-up. We've seen some very tragic situations that way. So history, physical examination, blood tests, and then at different times, bone marrow examinations, CT scans, PET scans are all really important in the long-term follow-up, and it's important that you not be lost to follow-up. Because I think, as we've just articulated, you can live a long time with this disease now, but there are going to be new treatments that are going to be available to you that are FDA approved. There will be new studies that you could potentially participate in. So my hope, and well, I already have experienced the hope, is that patients who have relapsed with this disease can really have long-term outcomes and without tremendous, remarkable side effects. And so it's just very important not to be lost to follow-up.